Welcome, welcome. Books. We have books. So I will be following, starting today, this book. And it's an easy read. It's a helpful read. Desmond Tutu, Book of Forgiving. By no means do you have to read it to stay up with our class, but it may be helpful as well. Look at all of you. Okay. Fine. Oh, Brian told me to stay on the camera. Should I do the mic? Might as well, huh?
If you feel like it.
Might as well. That way Karen way in the back row can hear me just fine.
Because an old doesn't mean I'm
Well, I wasn't singling you out for your age. But just your placement in the room. There you go. Yeah. So we're going to talk about forgiveness for the next month, maybe longer, but certainly this week and the following 3 weeks. And we wanted to do this for a while because I talk about forgiveness with a decent amount of frequency in my sermons because it comes up a decent amount. Jesus talks about it quite a bit. It's an important part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, but it's really more complex than we can fit into a 15-minute sermon or 13-minute, as I often am. Also, we have handouts from last week. Those of you who are here for Abby's presentation on gender diversity, pronouns and all of that. And so really great presentation from last week. If you want copies of the PowerPoint, they are over there. They are over there. So forgiveness. I just want to kind of jump right in the deep end here with here's Bishop Tutu and his daughter. I think it's pronounced Mpho. Mpho. Tutu died a few years ago. She's still an Anglican priest, and they wrote this book together. How many of you know about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and what took place in South Africa? How many of you don't know? I've said those words, you have no idea. Great. Well, let me tell you what happened, because it's so important in the history of the world. It is truly so important. When apartheid ended, what was the great fear that the world had around South Africa? Being all the power being handed from a very small white minority to a much larger black majority in South Africa. What was the fear that the world had in that transition of power? Vengeance. How can this nation be reborn without simply repeating the sins of its past? Because there's something very natural about, or it feels natural, it feels instinctive, that when we've been harmed, to harm with an equal measure or perhaps greater measure. We see it on the playground, it kind of comes naturally to us. And so there's great, great fear that there is going to be massive bloodshed in South Africa after the fall of apartheid. And Mandela, when he was freed, there was an open question about what kind of a leader would this man be? We weren't sure. Well, Mandela, on the night that he was freed, he stayed at Tutu's home because these two had become good friends. And Bishop Tutu had been advocating for peace and for the end of apartheid for many, many years, and had become a bit of a pariah in Western circles because Western powers, of course, were allied with the white apartheid. And so what Tutu and Mandela conceived of is at the very birth of this nation, we need to find a way to to give this nation a rebirth with forgiveness at the very heart of it. So they created what they called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. What the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was a government-sponsored opportunity for those who had committed sins, crimes, horrible crimes during apartheid to come forward to an official panel and confess. Confess what they've done. And in the process of that, if you agreed to confess, you were given amnesty. There would be no jailing, no punishment for those who came. And what you saw was a extraordinary beginning of victims and perpetrators being given an opportunity to, in a government-sponsored forum, to hear one another and then create the opportunity for forgiveness. And they did not require, of course, Tutu and others actually wanted, if you were going to come and receive amnesty, you needed to express sorrow, contrition, and regret. The politicians in South Africa, according to Tutu, were actually wiser than the theologians. Because the politicians rightly said, if we make it a condition that you say you're sorry, how will anyone believe it? Over every single confession would simply be, you're simply saying that in order to receive amnesty. So they said, we will put no conditions on this apart from your honest confession, whatever that may be. And of course, the vast majority of people did turn to either the victims or the survivors, oftentimes, because many times it's involved murder, and offered forgiveness, offered sincere repentance, and forgiveness was often granted. So I want to start right off the bat here. This is in the first couple pages of this book they've written together. There is nothing that cannot be forgiven, and there is no one undeserving of forgiveness. Do we believe that?
Well, we try. I try.
That's hard, right?
Yeah.
That's really, really hard to say there's nothing that cannot be forgiven, and really no one who is undeserving of forgiveness. How on earth can we possibly believe that's the case? It helps me greatly to look at case studies like what's happened in South Africa, because whatever my journey on forgiveness is, it's not insignificant. But it's not family members being raped, tortured, murdered, systemically oppressed for decades on end. It's not to minimize my hurt, it's just reality. My hurt matters, your hurt matters. But I think for most of us, it's probably not anywhere near on the level of what we witnessed there.
How long was the country in?
How long is apartheid? Good question.
I have no idea. I mean, I remember hearing about when I was in high school, but I don't know when it started or anything.
Yeah, I think I can look that up for next week. I believe it was initially British rule, and then it turns over in colonialism to Dutch. Yeah, it eventually becomes so. The apartheid government itself was a Dutch reform. And here's the great thing: a Dutch reformed government. Those are Presbyterians. That's what they are. These are people. The Netherlands was a profoundly Presbyterian / Reformed, which is synonymous. Reformed means you're on the continent of Europe. Presbyterian means you're in the British Isles. That's kind of the only difference between the two. But this is our heritage. These are our brothers and sisters who instituted this form of government. So I thought right up front, what if we just hear a story that shows it's possible? I think we can start almost at the end of listen to what's possible. I played this a couple years ago in church, but that's been a while. Let's try it again. This is from 2011. StoryCorps, NPR.
It's Friday morning, time for StoryCorps, the project that records conversations between loved ones and friends. Today we'll hear from two people who could very easily have been enemies. As a teenager, O'Shea Israel was involved with gangs and drugs. One night at a party, he got into a fight with another boy and killed him. O'Shea is now 34 and has finished serving his prison sentence for murder. He came to StoryCorps with Mary Johnson, the mother of the boy he killed.
You and I met at Stillwater Prison. I wanted to know if you were in the same mindset of what I remember from court, where I wanted to go over and hurt you, but you were not that 16-year-old. You were a grown man. I shared with you about my son.
And he became human to me. You know, when I met you, it was like, okay, this guy is real. And then when it was time to go, you broke down and started shedding tears, and the initial thing to do was just try to hold you up as best I can. Just hug you like I would my own mother, you know.
After you left the room, I began to say, I just hugged the man that murdered my son. And I instantly knew that all that anger and animosity, all the stuff I had in my heart for 12 years for you, I knew it was over, that I had totally forgiven you.
As far as receiving forgiveness from you, sometimes I still don't know how to take it because I haven't totally forgiven myself yet. It's something that I'm learning from you. I won't say that I have learned yet because it's still a process that I'm going through.
I treat you as I would treat my son, and our relationship is beyond belief. We live next door to one another.
Yeah, so you can see what I'm doing. You know, firsthand. We actually bump into each other all the time, leaving in and out of the house. You know, our conversations, they come from, well, how come you ain't called over here to check on me in a couple of days? You ain't even asked me if I need my garbage to go out. I find those things funny because it's a relationship with a mother for real.
Well, my natural son is no longer here. I didn't see him graduate. Now you're going to college. I'll have the opportunity to see you graduate. I didn't see him get married. Hopefully one day I'll be able to experience that with you.
And just to hear you say those things and to be in my life in the manner that which you are is my motivation. It motivates me to make sure that I stay on the right path. You still believe in me. And the fact that you can do it despite how much pain I cause you, it's amazing.
I know it's not an easy thing, to be able to share our story together, even with us sitting here looking at each other right now. I know it's not an easy thing. So I admire that you can do this.
I love you, lady.
I love you too, son.
Mary Johnson with O'Shea Israel at StoryCorps in Minneapolis. The conversation will be archived along with all StoryCorps interviews at the Library of Congress, and the podcast is at npr.org.
There's nothing that cannot be forgiven. And there's no one.
And now more from NPR.
No.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Giles Snyder.
Thanks, Giles. No, we're good.
They updated her story this week.
Yes, I heard that. And so Mary Johnson has since, she's now married to a man who, whose own son, I think her daughter, had been killed. And he was sent to a talk, as Mary and O'Shea, a big part of their work is going and sharing about the power of forgiveness. And so she was presenting at a church, and this man's children said, you need to go hear Mary Johnson because you're bound up by this resentment towards your child's killer. And he ended up going, and they met, and they've since fallen in love and have gotten married, and O'Shea was part of the wedding party. So their story continues. It's funny when I've researched them a bit, O'Shea and Mary, because it's an extraordinary story, but what happens after? and I've been following them for a while. And when you look at the comments that folks make, like, just on that website, go in the comments section, you'll hear people regularly saying, oh, she must be really psychologically damaged because she's confusing, one son for another. So it's like you want to look at this extraordinary gift of forgiveness and find a way to go, something's not right here. Because it feels so otherworldly. But what if it's just, what if it's a freedom that's available to every one of us, but one that we are either afraid to or don't want to engage with? So, when it comes to this issue of why forgive, the answer isn't, as far as I'm concerned, because God tells you to, because it's your duty, because God forgave you. I mean, all those things may be true, and I think probably are true. That's not, that won't be enough to motivate you to want to forgive. Duty is just not a long-term motivator, I think, for most of us. The reason that we forgive is in order to be free, to set ourselves free. Because the wrongs that other people have done to us bind us to that other person. And the memory of what's taken place is one that needs to be healed, needs to be forgiven. I forget who it was. I think it was, I can't remember now, but it doesn't matter. But I mentioned in my sermon last year that forgiveness is just not something that you have to do. And I think that's right. It isn't something you have to do. It's something you get to do. You are invited to do in order to be free. We fear, I think, that forgiveness is somehow letting people off the hook. And there's an element to which that's true. I mean, there's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There was, at least in that case, we will not punish you if you confess. And there's something about that feels wrong to our souls. We think there needs to be a one-to-one, right? You did this, this must happen in response. But what forgiveness does is allow for this cycle of harm to end. Because when something horrible's happened, whatever that is, O'Shea kills Mary Johnson's son. What justice is bringing the world to kill O'Shea then? I mean, I guess it's one-to-one. Is Mary's soul healed because O'Shea would be killed by the state? Does that somehow restore her and her loss? Turns out, actually, restoring the loss was going to be through this path of forgiveness. And I'm hearing at the end of that recording, the one that kills me at the end is I love you too, son. Dang. Who saw that coming? I don't think she saw it coming. But the path to get there was through this path of forgiveness. So I got some quotes here. We all know what it's like to have our hearts hardened by resentments, but if we can forgive everyone, everything, then we can be free from anger, hatred, and resentment. How often should I forgive, Lord? As many as 7 times? Jesus said, not 7 times, but I tell you, 77 times, which I preached on a few weeks ago, and pretty clearly, the implication is 77, or some of your Bibles say 70 times 7. It doesn't really matter. Obviously, the implication is not that you get to 78 and some angel appears from heaven. All right, that's it. We got to 77, 78, beyond the pale. Or if you do 70 times 7, 490, 491, that's it. Clearly not. It's meant to be infinite. Infinite. Forgive everyone, everything. The only way to experience healing and peace is to forgive. Until we can forgive, we remain locked in our own pain and locked out of the possibility of experiencing healing and freedom, locked out of the possibility of being at peace. Without forgiveness, we remain tethered to the person who harmed us. We are bound with chains of bitterness, tied together, trapped. Until we can forgive the person who harmed us, that person will hold the keys to our happiness. That person will be our jailer. You know that we always think of it that way. And when we withhold forgiveness, we keep ourselves chained to the person who harmed us. It ensures the chain remains. Forgiveness is nothing less than the way that we heal the world. We heal the world by healing each and every one of our hearts. The process is simple, but it is not easy. So what's so hard about this? On your end, in your life, why is this so difficult for us?
One thing is sometimes we have this idea that we need to be forgiven for some slight, it could be big. And like Mary, the other person, well, has just kind of moved on. So if I ask for forgiveness and they're not even aware
Oftentimes people aren't.
that I had done, then there's something incomplete about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess I am not forgiven because it was not ever, I don't know, it's like, it isn't the healing sense that you're actually looking for. And so maybe the things I'm thinking about or that I actually ask about aren't really, well, you can see how this is an issue.
Yeah, we offer the gift of forgiveness, but until it's received, and we have no control over that. Right? We have no control over whether or not another person will, in the case of granting forgiveness, we have no assurance that the other person will admit to the harm at all. And that, of course, can be re-traumatizing. We'll get to all that, for sure. But it happens the other way, too, which is when we're asking for forgiveness, the other person may not recognize or remember the harm at all. So
It's related to hurt, I think, for most of us. So you feel someone has hurt you, or they feel you've hurt them, and they're sort of tied together.
yeah, there's this thought that if we withhold forgiveness, we will hurt them in the way that we've been hurt. And that may be true, but it may not be. Right? Because we have no control over how the other person responds. Sometimes we hold on to our bitterness, and it's like, I'm going to show that other person they don't care. They moved on with their life, right? They let go a long time ago. Sorry.
Yes, to a lot of that. And I guess since my divorce is when I've been most thinking about and processing the idea of forgiveness. And I think when I'm holding a grudge, I'm afraid I'm gonna let that person hurt me again in the same way. And I need to remind myself, I can't let that happen again. And I want the other person to see, this really mattered to me. You really, really can't do this to me again. And I think, particularly in the case of my divorce, I most started to let go of that grudge, if you will, when I realized that's not gonna happen again. That's off the table. It's not a thing. It's not gonna happen again. And so I felt like that part of me could relax and let that grudge go. Because I didn't need to remind myself anymore, don't do that again, you'll get hurt. And I didn't need that person to see me anymore saying, don't do it again. That really hurt me.
Yeah.
So yeah. And then other times I've forgiven, I'll just add, for a variety of reasons. I just didn't feel like being angry anymore. I didn't want to carry that anymore.
Right. You're ready.
I wanted to set it down and go on.
I appreciate that very much, because I think everything you spoke to describes the reality. This is a process.
Yeah, it's
All right.
like grieving, you can't put it on a timeline.
It's
Like,
not
when you're
forced.
ready,
That's right.
You'll get there.
If you try to force it, it won't happen. But your heart's ready when it's ready. And part of that readiness will be exactly just I need to keep myself safe again, as you should, right? Forgiveness should not mean, it cannot mean, I'll just move right back into the same broken relationship I was in before. It can't be that. So being able to get to a space where you go, no, I'm actually safe now. I've healed enough in my heart that I'm ready to forgive. So I appreciate it very much, because I think this is why I resist so much the duty language around forgiveness, because it takes as long as it takes, just like grief, and it is not one and done. It takes time. And it happens in layers too, right? I bet we've all experienced where you think you've forgiven something, and you have, and you did, and then something comes up that reminds you of that thing. It's like, oh, I got to start over again. It's like, yeah, you get to do it all over again. And in the process, you have changed. What? I thought I already forgiven this. You did, to the extent that you were able to at that point. And then this new event has resurfaced these emotions again. You get the opportunity to go over again. But you do so changed. Matthew,
I'm kind of building on that. I think often the event or the person is a part of the story we tell ourselves or we tell others. So to forgive means you have to rewrite your story.
Yeah. Yes, and that can be very difficult when we have villains in our stories. I've got villains in my stories, and guess what? It's never me. It's always in people. And the part of the process of forgiveness is rewriting the story we tell ourselves about the villains in our life, which isn't to diminish the hurt. And we'll get to that, right? There's nothing about forgiveness that is diminishing the hurt that we've gone through. It's actually the exact opposite. It's naming the hurt and the harm for what it truly was and how it affected us. Without the naming of that, I don't think forgiveness is real. That's why I often I encourage folks to not use the phrase "it's okay." When someone comes to you and apologizes, "Oh, I'm really sorry that I did this." Oh, it's okay. When you say it's okay, you're actually, what you're doing is you're staying self-protected. It didn't hurt me. And maybe there's times where it didn't. There are times where folks come to you and apologize and it really didn't harm you. And maybe that's the appropriate language. But I think more often than not, we use the language "it's okay" in order to say I didn't get hurt when we were. And it's better to either say I forgive you or just say thank you. Thank you for your apology. I really appreciate that. I used to always say you have to just say the words "I forgive you" back. Sometimes that can be a little iffy too. One, if you're not ready. Two, take like employment settings. Sometimes saying I forgive you might be more than you kind of should say. But we can always express gratitude for the other person's apology. If it means forgiveness, it's precisely not okay. Yeah.
I think sometimes not forgiving is a way I can tell myself I'm a little better than you. I've made mistakes, but I'm justified. You're not.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a scapegoating, a moral distancing. Forgiveness does put us on the same moral plane. That's scary, right? As those who harmed us, to say, I'm actually, we have a shared humanity. Even if I didn't do what you did, even though I can't understand why you did what you did, I'm still human, you are human. It's rehumanizing the other. It's very, very important, but difficult to do. Karen?
There's another side of forgiving. When you have harmed someone, to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
And that for me is very,
Very difficult. O'Shea mentioned that in the story corner, that I'm working on forgiving myself, but I haven't gotten there yet. Oftentimes, the hardest person to forgive can be ourselves. For the same reasons. We don't want to let ourselves off the hook. We don't want to minimize the harm. But if other people are worthy of forgiveness, surely we are as well.
and reliving the hurt that you caused somebody else.
Yeah, which is part of the storytelling, which is one of the steps, right? It's telling the story of what's happened. What forgiveness is not. There's Mary O'Shea. Forgiveness is not weakness, which I think there's something about holding on to the hurt that feels empowering. Right? I didn't do this consciously, but it's like holding up fists. There's a strength that feels like in resentment. And forgiveness, the opening one's hands, literally what the Greek word means is to let go. Aphiemi. It describes exactly what the soul has to do. That feels intuitively like weakness. But of course, it takes extraordinary strength. Okay. How does that happen?
It's a gift from Brian.
Cool.
Price it up.
Piano. Mike. Could just turn it off.
You want me to get Brian?
Sure. If you don't.
Sure. That's a whole, that's around.
Thank you. Yeah, forgiveness is not weakness. It is a remarkable feat to be able to see past the humanity of the behavior and recognize the humanity of the person committing the atrocious act. This is not weakness, this is heroic strength, the noblest strength of the human spirit. Part of what we have to do is exactly what the quote says, distinguishing between the act, what philosophers talk about act and being. Distinguishing between what you've done and who you are. The act, here's what I've done. The being, here's who you are. In forgiveness, what it does is precisely allow us to make a distinction between those two things. What you've done and who you are. What you've done was profoundly wrong. But who you are is a human being, deserving of love and belonging, despite what you've done. I also wanted to show, this one's real short, but I wanted to show you just a glimpse of what's possible. I think there's a way that, again, we think of forgiveness as weakness, but I want to be able to hold it. The people who do this the best, who are our greatest teachers, are the most joyful people there are. So it's like, what do we want to be? Do we want to live full, joyful lives? This is part of the path. So this is Tutu and Dalai Lama just talking for a minute here about
Forgiveness does not mean forget. You should keep memory about the other anything. But because of that, there is possibility to develop anger or hatred. That control. That's the meaning of forgiveness.
Almost natural response is when I'm hit, I hit back. When you have been refined, you put yourself in the shoes of the other.
It is totally wrong. The practice of tolerance and practice of forgiveness is signs of weakness. Totally wrong. 100% wrong. Or 1000% wrong. Isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean,
This is forgiveness. It's a sign of strength. Isn't it?
absolutely. Yes, I was just going to say, those who say forgiving is a sign of weakness have not tried it.
There's one simple. I want you to hear that laughter, because that's Tutu. That's who he was. Rob Bell was once at an event where Tutu and Dalai Lama were both speaking, and Rob was part of the panel as well. And he described, and I've told some of you this before, so if you've heard the punchline, wait. And Rob asked, what do you think happens when Dalai Lama and Bishop Tutu see each other across the room? Because he said they came in from different parts of the room, they hadn't seen each other in however many months or years, and then they see each other. What do you think happens in the way they greet one another? hugging, happy. They tickle each other. So that's exactly right. That dog comes up and starts tickling Tutu, says, "Oh, you gained some weight, haven't you, Desmond?" They just giggle and laugh and go, "Wow." And you go, this is what's possible. This is the abundant life that's actually possible for us if we live free, if we learn what it means to forgive. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. We'll talk more about this. I do think that Christianity in particular is both given a hard time, that we oftentimes equate forgiveness with forgetting. They are not the same thing. I do think that forgetting actually has a place in our theology in a way that might be uniquely belong to us, although it belongs to Jewish heritage as well. You think of the Old Testament passages about God remembering their sins no more. There is a goal, an ultimate goal of forgetting. It might and probably will take place in kingdom come, as opposed to here and now in most of our cases, because of the need to remain safe. Because we mentioned, in order to protect ourselves from having this happen again, we need to remember. But not in such a way that we all remember forever. The goal, I think, actually should be, eventually, to forget. But that may not be safe here and now. I do think it can happen actually in glimpses, and does, but probably with lesser hurts. Jean?
I think there's something about that remembering in terms of forgiveness of someone else, of ourselves. If we know if that memory starts to reappear, and we've learned that's very upsetting, and to just try not to go there in our minds because we know where it takes us. The intervals in between that get longer.
Yeah.
So you're not remembering. Well, I'm talking about particular ones that ended, but I think it can apply to lots of things that by analyzing that and saying that's not where I want to go, I dealt with it. It's not saying it's over, but it's saying I don't want to go there just right now at this moment and the moments after this. Then it gradually the intervals when you're remembering that get longer. It's not forgetting, it's not waiting until I get to someplace in the afterlife that I don't deal with that. But it I'd say personally that's been very helpful.
Yeah. The intervals getting longer is
in between that memory.
Yeah.
Coming back. And then no, I'm not going there today, so each time it works. I mean,
it's beautiful. Forgiving requires giving voice to the violations and naming the pain we have suffered. Forgiveness does not require that we carry our suffering in silence or be martyrs on a cross of lies. Forgiveness does not mean we pretend things are anything other than the way they are. There's a naming that takes place in forgiveness, a naming of what a thing is. And until we grant it, we don't actually get to tell the truth about what's happened. I bet some of you have experienced this where if you've gotten to a place of forgiveness with folks, particularly maybe those who are close in your life, family members or whatever, and you offer them forgiveness, what's the first thing they say? Who are you to forgive me? Because they know that in being offered forgiveness, they're being named a sinner. They're being named a perpetrator. Otherwise, there's nothing to forgive. Just wires back.
Yeah, sorry, you
That's
were
okay.
there.
That's okay.
Joel?
Yeah.
Do we need to tell people we've forgiven them?
No. We'll get to that too. We don't need to. And it'll take great discernment determining when and how. I do think there's an expression that needs to take place. Whether that, and it probably needs to be more than internal for most of us. It's just taking place in here and in the silence of our own heads. I have found, I think a lot of folks find that until it gets somehow externalized, somehow spoken into the world, whether to the other person or not, until it gets expressed, I think there's a healing that doesn't take place. But knowing, when we actually tell the other person, that takes discernment. Because, like we said, there are people who aren't going to receive it and may re-traumatize you in the process. So knowing when to do that is tricky business. And of course, forgiveness is not easy. Forgiveness is not an effortless act for any one of us, and it does not serve anyone to minimize the complexity involved in the work of forgiving. It is simple, but it is not easy. That's the parable today. Very, very easy to understand Jesus' parable that we're going to read about here today in worship. But it is not easy to put into practice. It's not easy to live out. So the rest of this book goes through these 4 steps. 4 steps to forgiveness. If you look on the back of your sheet there, in the center of the diagram, we've got hurt, harm, and loss. This happens to every one of us. To be human is to experience hurt, harm, and loss at various points throughout our lives. No getting around that. No matter how well we were raised, no matter what neighborhood we grew up in, who our parents were, any of that, we will experience hurt, harm, and loss. And from that, we will experience pain. But then what do we do with our pain? That's what we got to decide. With that pain, we can choose to harm. Hold on to our pain and say, I'm going to strike back. And in the process, we reject our shared humanity. And we hear this in our language around justice, in our public discourse. This person was an animal. You're an animal. And anytime there's language that's used to dehumanize, you go, oh, we're on the revenge cycle. We may not know it or not, but the moment we start speaking about another person as a monster, as an animal, as super predators, or whatever language we use that's anything less than human, we've moved on to this revenge cycle. If we're rejecting our shared humanity, we move towards vengeance, retaliation, payback in some form, punitive violence, which of course just creates more harm. So the question is, how do we stop the harm? That's the real question. How does the violence end? All right, I'm going to shut that off now. It's getting really loud.
Joel, I wonder about the word humanity, and if I speak the word sacredness, our shared sacredness, it stops it right there.
Yes, because humanity, that phrase may or may not, your view of humanity might be pretty darn low. In which case, that may not be enough. So yeah, our shared sacred identity. Yeah. Both made in the image of God. I like that. So the other path, besides choosing to harm, of course, is choosing to heal. And that takes us into this 4-fold path of forgiveness, which is first, and I think most important, is telling that story. Telling the story of what happened to you and how it affected you.
And memory plays such a big part of that. Mm-hmm. You and I may remember that same event so differently.
Yeah. Yeah, memory plays a huge role. One indication that you might be holding trauma in your life is an event, a memory that's taken place of harm, where you can go right, you can go right back there. You can smell what the room smelled like. You remember word for word what the person said. It's as though you can go right back and replay the tape. That's a sign of trauma. Fascinatingly, when we heal, what we find is actually those memories begin to change, which is amazing. That when the memory stays frozen in amber, stuck in time, that means that the healing process hasn't reached its completion yet. But when we've gone through this work of forgiveness, through this work of healing, then all of a sudden those memories can begin to change, which is fascinating. We see this a lot with people who've been in wars, and combat zones. That their inability to change the memory is the indication they've not yet healed. So the memory itself has the capacity to change. Which is amazing. So we tell our story, and in the process of that story, then you have to say how it hurt you. Here's what happened. Here's how it felt. Here's what it did to me. And then there's this granting of forgiveness. Recognizing our shared humanity, or as Jackie put it, recognizing our sacred, shared sacred identity, perhaps means the same thing. And this last step is renewing or releasing the relationship. So renewing is when we, again, it's not forgetting that the fact that it's a renewal means that I'm going to be in a relationship with this other person, but now in a new way. Releasing is when we say, I'm actually not going to be in a relationship with you anymore. At least, I don't have any plans or intents to. And I think it's not the ideal, but sometimes we don't live in an ideal world, and that's okay too. And so forgiveness, the process can take place even if we don't want to be in a relationship with the other person. And oftentimes that's going to be the case because of lack of repentance, lack of safety, and just because you're not ready. And that's okay. You don't need to want to be in a relationship with the other person, but you want to be free.
I would just add to that, sometimes the inherent nature of the relationship doesn't require you to renew it.
That's right.
Say, for example, you were in a bad work situation and you've left it.
Yeah.
You don't need to renew that relationship.
That's
You
right.
can graciously release it. This is a thing that is in my past.
Yeah.
It's done, it's gone.
But I don't want to be bound to it anymore.
But if it's your neighbor or your brother or somebody like that, you're probably gonna want to look harder at renewing that sort of
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah.
Be much harder to get that person completely out of your life.
Yeah, that's right. And even trying to, they're still not out of your life. There are some of those relationships where it's like, great, try. Try to not be in a relationship to your child, to your ex-partner. You're going to have a relationship with them one way or another. Especially if there's kids involved, you can't cut them out entirely. So renewing in one form or another is a better path. Forgiveness is simply about understanding that every one of us is both inherently good and inherently flawed. Within every hopeless situation and every seemingly hopeless person lies the possibility of transformation. That's the hope, right? That we might actually somehow be transformed. Ideally for both ourselves and then the person who's harmed us, but sometimes it's just us, and that's okay too. But the goal is to be changed, to be free. All right. So next week, we're going to jump into these steps, telling the story, naming the hurt, and what that actually involves, what that looks like. In the book, if you grab one, are these really wonderful prayers and exercises that are really, really helpful. So why don't we close with one of the opening prayers that I find, this one they call prayer before the prayer. We'll close with this. I want to be willing to forgive, but I dare not ask for the will to forgive, in case you give it to me and I am not yet ready. I am not yet ready for my heart to soften. I am not yet ready to be vulnerable again. Not yet ready to see that there is humanity in my tormentor's eyes, or that the one who hurt me may also have cried. I am not yet ready for the journey. I am not yet interested in the path. I am at the prayer before the prayer of forgiveness. Grant me the will to want to forgive. Grant it to me, not yet but soon. Can I even form the words, forgive me? Dare I even look? Do I dare see the hurt I have caused? I can glimpse all the shattered pieces of that fragile thing, that soul trying to rise on the broken wings of hope. But only out of the corner of my eye, I am afraid of it. And if I'm afraid to see, how can I be afraid? How can I not be afraid to say, forgive me? Is there a place where we can meet, you and me? The place in the middle, the no man's land, where we straddle the lines, where you are right and I am right too, and both of us are wrong and wronged. Can we meet there? And look for the place where the path begins, the path that ends when we forgive.